Okay.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome to the CGTN newsroom here in Beijing, where I can tell you the newsroom has just gone very quiet now because I'm talking very loudly. You know that we've been doing these online social media hits for the best part of the last week, all the way around this 19th Congress of the CPC. The others we did up on the 26th floor, which is like in the clouds up there, one of our newsrooms. This one is right down on the 3rd floor in the CGTN worldwide headquarters, and we have no windows here, so we can't see out, but we can see in. And with me is my partner in crime, Lindy from the Nairobi bureau, and also for the first time we get to meet the one and only Han Bin
from headquarters
from
in Beijing.
Headquarters. What is your? I'm always a bit intrigued with you. What is your job title? Are you business?
Actually, I'm a producer for the reporting team, but I'm also a reporter on the field. I think whoever in this team,
Right.
you know, whenever something happens in China, you have the responsibility to react. And through the years, I think for covering some of the political issues, maybe I can have a kind of certain kind of advantage to be covering that.
Yeah.
Well, we're certainly in good company.
Exactly. So
today.
we're all reporters, in other words, and the only person missing is Mr. Xu, who has been with us on previous occasions. He can't be here now because he's very busy.
She is also very senior. He's been closely working with me for almost 2 decades.
Yes. He is the hardest working man here, let me tell you. He does 14-hour days most days. Anyway, we're here because, of course, this is the final session today of the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China. And what's going to happen on this particular social media hit is that Han and Lindy and me are going to make a live contribution onto the television station in the studio behind us. And we thought it would be a wizard wheeze if those of you watching online all the way around the world followed us here in the newsroom onto the set. Then we'll cut up our interview so you can see what actually goes out on CGTN. And then at the end of it, the cameras are going to follow us off the set, round the corner, where we're going to sit down and have another chat and maybe even a cup of coffee, or possibly even a gin and tonic. I don't know.
I think it's a creative format. I think it's actually in line with what, to make it big, Xi Jinping says, being creative, being innovative is how we can make our, how we can make our course to develop even faster and better.
It does allow us to reach new audiences, different people, by broadcasting on digital media. And I think it's a way that, not only media thinking like this, but politics too. How do we find different audiences? How do you get the message across to different people using different platforms?
Exactly. One of the toughest questions to us and toughest challenges for us covering the political stories in China is that, for example, in my mind, I'm always thinking, how do those policies relate to the ordinary people? How can you make detailed or vivid examples to match with the policies on top? And what are the implications to the policies relates to the world? And if we all were at the Great Hall of People, and when we were there, I really think the 19th Party Congress is a global event. Look at the sheer numbers. And John, maybe why do you think today's event attached so much attention?
Well, I think part of it, Han Bin, is that people are fascinated by China. Away from China, people are absolutely intrigued by what goes on here. They know that we're living now in the Asian century. They know that the last century was essentially the American century, but this one is the Asian century. And China, of course, is right at the heart of that. And so there's a lot for their children and their children's children, and probably a lot of dealings with China that they are going to have. And so for that reason, they're absolutely fascinated. The other reason is, of course, that compared to the West, it's a completely different culture here. Almost everything is different, really, and the language is impenetrable to people who haven't studied it for a very long time. And that also adds to the mystique and the intrigue, and people just simply want to learn more. And I think when someone like the Chinese president, or the general secretary as he is technically until he's reappointed, when he speaks, people, particularly business people in the West, they want to know what it is that he really means, because I think Chinese is one of those languages, rather like Arabic, where there are a lot of words, a lot of phrases that can be used, and people in the West often hear them and they think, oh, that's what he means. When actually Chinese scholars will tell you that it really means something different. So for all of those reasons, China is a conundrum and a fascination, and people want to know more, and that's really where CGTN steps in.
Linda, you find more differences, you find some similarities when it comes to not only the lives, the policies, building roads, and etc.
Well, there's definitely, I mean, I think there is a bit of a culture, I wouldn't call it a culture shock, but there is a sense that you're in a very, very different place when you arrive from Africa to China. What's quite interesting, though, is that, China's still considered among the developing nations, but of course, in contrast to where I come from, this is a very developed place, or Beijing at least is an incredibly developed city. But indeed, having said that, I think what we have in common is that, China's had a very interesting and long past of poverty, which is something that Africa deals with a lot. Obviously, it's a major challenge, and China's overcome that, So for me, it's interesting to kind of look at the situation and think, how did they do it? What worked here that didn't work in Africa? What strategies, what policies were able to eradicate poverty in such a short space of time? And that hasn't happened, in such a big way as it has in China.
I need to finish a few lines because they tell us we are going to get into that. I really think if you have chance and time to see China more, because to me I think if you want to know China better, it's better be here. And if you want to know China even better, you need to talk with the people. And there's a vast diversity between East, West, North, and South, the minorities, and also people living in the rural areas. So I do think it's a huge challenge leading this such a populous nation. China's story is very, very complicated, though I think from the Congress we can see that Xi is becoming much more confident about his role.
I think that's one of the great success stories of this 19th National Congress, that it has, in a sense, dotted I's and crossed T's, as it were, for a lot of people around the world who now have some clarity where they did not before about where President Xi wants to take the country. So that's a good reason for holding it in and of itself, I think, right there.
I think we need to go to the studio, and then
the cameras will follow?
Yeah, they will follow us.
Okay.
And then we will be talking.
Continue,
after.
Right, let's go.
Yes.
Follow us then.
This is actually a place that we need to be very quiet when we get into it. It says it's one of the largest studios in the nation.
Is it really?
It is.
Is it?
The facility is important, but the key is if you want to do a very good program, I do think the content and the way of telling stories is important.
Well, I mean, I assume that there are studios like this one dotted all over this building, because there are so many television stations here, aren't there? There's like 16.
We have to walk while talking. They say we need to go. Maybe the signals will not be very good because it's going to be a long way, but this is how we do our work every day.
Right.
So follow us.
You can see it's not very glamorous behind the scenes, as you can see.
Yeah, people are busy actually doing the job. I think we all know.
Can you see this? Can you see this here? This is one of our control rooms where people press buttons and mix the sound and all that kind of stuff.
And CGTN is developing very fast. For example, we are colleagues, but you are in you are in a far away place.
We've never met. This is the first time we've ever met.
People,
but
I feel as if I know Han Bin.
Exactly.
I like your stories. I'm happy that we have the Congress coverage so that all the international correspondents can share and come together. So when we get into the control room, we really cannot talk loudly because it's on live. But you can shoot what they're working at. It would be fascinating. It won't be so many chances that viewers can see what is really behind the scene.
It's a very rare glimpse. You don't get this opportunity very often.
Don't go away, really.
So stay tuned and concentrate on the director, because the director really holds the whole show together. So follow us. Lots of TV monitors in here.
孙悦，让林底坐最外边。
林底坐最哪边最哪儿？2号屏。
最亮的地儿。
好，进来。右边。
主持人，你一会儿有空帮我跟他们。
肖月，他位置现在对吗？
不是，他得坐这个，他们调好，一会儿4分钟再给他们调位置和耳机，千万别动，因为昨天我们的机位是特别理想化的情况下卡好，才能卡出他们仨人。因为3个嘉宾都以前没做过，所以一会儿上下也不要动，左右也不要动。
You're getting a very rare glimpse at one of the CGTN control rooms. This program is about to go out live, and these people are working hard to make sure it goes out live.
还有1分钟。
I don't know. Never been.
可以完成吗？不行就先别动了。跟他说30秒就必须出来了，做不好就先别做了。一会儿片头在 A， 然后 C2缓推就行。头条是个片儿，然后片儿的时候再弄也行。还有30秒吧，可以让他们先出来，不着急戴耳机。 让音频先出来，音频他们先出来。好 ，A9 片头准备15、14、13、12、11、9、8、7、6、5、4、3、2、1，走一脚。你先 C2。 这位置对吗？昨天看没那么挤，一会儿就好了。就在了。
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
不用摇笔了。第二。
Han Zhongxi live in Beijing. Welcome to the world today on CGTN. We begin with the latest from the 19th CPC National Congress, which concluded today in the Chinese capital, Beijing. The party's leadership has been reshuffled, and they're CPC's highest body. They will elect a new Politburo and its standing committee on Wednesday. At the same time, 133 new members of the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection were also elected.
同意的代表请举手。
A final approval to a new CPC Central Committee and a new Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. Delegates to the Congress also passed resolutions on the report of the 18th CPC Central Committee, the work report of the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, and an amendment to the CPC Constitution.
中国共产党第19次全国代表大会
The agenda of the 19th CPC National Congress is completed today. The report of the 18th Central Committee, approved by the Congress, established the goal of deciding to build a moderately prosperous society in an all-round way and open a new journey of building a modern socialist country.
新征程的目标
Delivering a report at last week's opening session, General Secretary Xi Jinping outlined a two-step approach to build China into a great modern socialist country after the completion of building a moderately prosperous society by 2020. He also said that China is at a critical moment in history as socialism with Chinese characteristics has entered a new era.
全面建成小康社会
This is our strategic vision for developing socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era. Finish building a moderately prosperous society in all respects. Proceed to achieving modernization, and then move on to turn China into a great modern socialist country in every dimension.
社会主义现代化新征程的壮丽篇章。
This Congress reflects greater openness, transparency, and China's increasing confidence. Many delegations to the Congress held open discussions, giving domestic and foreign media a chance to hear about the reforms of the last 5 years and the future implementations based on Xi Jinping's report.
To build a new low-carbon and clean energy system, we plan to invest 1.5 trillion yuan over the next 5 years to further develop a high-voltage electricity network. We will continue to expand the scale of electricity transportation from west to east and advance renewable energy bases in western parts of the country. We strive to play a leading role in the electric industry.
On the sidelines of the National Congress, 6 news conferences and 8 group interviews were held, covering almost every aspect of China's development, from politics to the economy and social affairs to the military. At those events, not only were questions taken from both Chinese and foreign media, but achievements were also introduced and serious commitments made.
Emissions from fossil fuel vehicles have been effectively reduced. Meanwhile, we are carrying out environmental prevention programs in rural areas. We have finished this work in over 100,000 villages, and nearly 200 million rural citizens are benefiting from this. Major ecological protection and restoration work is also carrying on smoothly.
Moreover, for the very first time in history, a delegate corridor allowed delegates from various industries and sectors to take questions from the media before entering the official venue. And this has improved interaction between the delegates and media and helped to diversify coverage of the event. The members of the Standing Committee of the new CPC Central Committee's Political Bureau are expected to meet the Chinese and foreign journalists on Wednesday morning. China has made tremendous progress since the last Party Congress in 2012, emerging to the world's second-largest economy and becoming one of the key players in international affairs. And now the 19th National Congress of the CPC has rolled out a fresh set of guidelines to target even more development in the next 5 years and to lead the country into a new era of hope and prosperity. So Yun, CGTN, reporting from the Great Hall of the People, Beijing.
As China's biggest political event this year, the 19th CPC National Congress attracted a record number of reporters from both home and abroad. How do they view China's most important political event? We have our reporters Han Bin from Beijing, Lingdim Tangana from CGTN Nairobi, and John Tarek from CGTN Washington joining me at this hour in our Beijing studio. They, of course, have followed and covered the entire political meeting. Thank you so much for being on the world today.
Thank you.
I wish to pick each one of your mind on what the party conference has offered. Let me go to you first, Bing. Your report on the party conference started way before the opening session on the 18th. In fact, you and I worked on a warm-up series leading up to that opening session on the 18th, and then you were at the Great Hall of the People for the opening and throughout the party conference this time. I'm going to go straight to one highlight from the party conference, that is the amendment to the Constitution. Help us understand just how significant is that change.
Well, that is one of the key achievements that's been hailed by the CPC today. We know that every Congress has a kind of historic mission and a kind of legacy they want to leave that can dramatically change China. Well, when we look at the evolution of the CPC history, Chairman Mao Zedong, his thought that established new China and gained political power, and Deng Xiaoping's theory of black cat or white cat, that is the ushering in reform and opening up and develop China's economy. And then Jiang Zemin's three represent is actually irreversibly change the CPC's formation that can usher in the entrepreneurs from the private sectors, and the Hu Jintao's scientific outlook of development is actually change the growth model. And now here comes Xi Jinping's thought of this new era of the characteristics of socialism. To me, I think the redefinition of a social contradiction resulted in the new tasks, and is a sharp change from the previous, which is looking from inward, now looking much more from outward. From what is much more in detail, I've interviewed a professor from the Central Party School, and please take a look.
The new generation of the world's largest political party. These new members will be the ones to carry on communism in China's new era. Professor Shen Chuanliang from the Central Party School has been studying the party history for some 2 decades. His focus is the new stage.
To put the party's latest thoughts on governance into the charter is to consolidate consensus. To put the breakthrough theoretical achievements and the practical experience into the charter will help promote the whole country's development in the new era with the new tasks.
Shen Chuanliang says putting Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era into the party constitution shows the significance of its core position and historic role. This new thought carries a vast spectrum of meanings. It makes clear the party's overarching goal, strategy, and policies for rejuvenation to make a strong, modern country by the middle of the century. These include the change of the principal contradiction, fostering confidence in the path, law-based governance, building a strong military, and new types of international relations. Certain principles are mandatory, like the party's leadership in a work, a people-centered approach, deepening reforms, and a new vision for growth.
This amendment is based on the party's previous thoughts to provide new ideas and solutions in dealing with new challenges and contradictions of society, which enters into the new era.
Professor Shen says revision is a CPC tradition in advancing with the times. Nearly every party congress has amended the charter, and once the new theoretical thoughts are enshrined, they could lead the country in an irreversible direction.
Hey everyone, I think the CPC charter is a small book, but it contains all of the important thoughts and principles that leading the world's biggest party. And every leadership, if you look at the history, had left their imprint into it. And today, Xi Jinping's thought have also been written in. I think the interesting is the implementation, and we need to see how does that mean to China's future and its impact on the world.
Well, it's absolutely more than just new content added to a book. It's legacy legacy going forward.
Let me tell you, in the West, that aspect of this story is one of the big headlines. The fact that Xi Jinping is being written into the Constitution. That is making headlines outside China right now, I can promise you that.
And stay with that thought, we'll come back to it in just a minute. You know, if we break down the Party Congress, it's essentially just 2 parts. We recap what China has accomplished in the last 5 years, and we look into the future with ambitious plans, with blueprints for China going to the next 5, 10, 20 years. Lindy, you said you were particularly impressed with how seriously the CPC is taking people's concerns going forward and the confident strides it is making with this National Congress. Your general impression reporting on the Party Congress this time?
I must say I've been quite struck by the scale of the event, and again I think that just sort of echoes to how significant an event it is that takes place every 5 years. I know of course just from the history that the first National Congress of the CPC took place in 1921 and it just had what, 12 members, 13 members that attended, and today the scale of the event in the Great Hall of the People, thousands of delegates, thousands of journalists this year, really just showing how significant, how big the party is and how significant an event this National Congress is. But just on that point of media, I was also struck by the openness of this year's event. I think for me as an outsider, I had perhaps a misconception or just a misunderstanding of the relationship between media and political authorities. And I thought perhaps it was a bit a cautious relationship between the two. But I was very impressed and quite, it was quite interesting to see in the press conferences that I attended that, journalists from the country and foreign journalists were standing up asking some daring, some bold questions, and CPC senior delegates were not shying away. They were answering those questions. They were very open about what the party is about, what was going on, the past 5 years, and of course the plans for the years to come. So just some of my observations in the past couple of days.
I was very much looking forward to you asking a question yesterday at that press conference.
I tried.
It's a pity CGTN didn't get a chance last time, but we got many questions asked for other press conferences. Lindy there has been modest calling herself an outsider. John, I don't think you're an outsider. This isn't your first visit to China. You've reported extensively on China. When you report from the United Nations in New York, a lot of the times there is a China angle, and you can pursue that angle. But this time you're reporting from Beijing. The proximity must have made things different and given you new experiences and new feelings and expressions. Talk to us about it.
Of course, we're very lucky in New York because at the Security Council, China took the chairmanship just a couple of months ago. So there was a lot of China influence in what was going on in New York at the Security Council. And they did very well, by the way. They were incredibly well organized. And they got through a lot of work in their month, which I think was the month of July. Here in Beijing, not my first time. I came in 1992. The city has changed an awful lot in that time. It was a low-rise city then. Now it's a high-rise city, as you know. My impressions of the week that I've spent with you all, I mean, who can forget that headline on the Thursday morning that Xi Jinping garnered in headlines and newspapers all over the world? New era, China at the center of the stage. I agree with Lindy's comments about access. It's been much, much more flexible and available to us than ever I imagined. The corridor has worked very well. I mean, it's not much of a corridor, it's not very long, but it gives journalists a chance to actually put their microphones right in front of the delegates' faces and get straight answers. So that is very, very good. And then for me, I think, you know, the great contradiction. I think for me, in a way, this is the story of the 19th National Party Congress, because you know, we all grew up with the notion that China people were asking to be clothed and to be fed and to be housed, but the contradiction was that the industry was backward. And now Xi Jinping has changed that completely, more or less turned it on its head, because now the contradiction is that Chinese people want a better life. They want fairness, they want justice, that sort of thing. But according to Xi Jinping, the economy is unbalanced and inadequate. And I think what he means by that is if you take the province of Sichuan, for example, where the pandas come from, anybody that doesn't live in China always loves the pandas, you see. There, in the big cities like Chengdu, the capital, and the other major urban centers, you have the moderate growth that he's talking about. But in the urban area, in the rural areas, very, very desperate poverty. And so I think that's something which clearly is very close to his heart. We know that, and is going to have to be addressed going forward, and probably will be addressed going forward. So I thought that, you know, this issue of the great contradiction was fascinating.
Hanbing, I want your take on this as well, because both Lindy and John there mentioned an open image that China is trying to project to the world, inviting journalists from all over the world to report on something of this magnitude and of this significance. You have reported not just on this particular party Congress, but on the Congresses before this. Have you felt the same evolving level of transparency and openness with the CPC and with how CPC is trying to get the world's attention on political events like this one?
Sure. I think in a way that China is really changing a lot. If you look back many decades ago, you know, to my knowledge, I've been covering the previous 4 actually. I think this is one of the very first times that the foreign correspondents get so close up to the delegates and so close up to the power centers. This is really fascinating. On the other side, I think the CPC, after so many years of development, has been gaining kind of confidence. If you see how they talk, if you see how they react, there is a sense of consensus on the growing confidence about his path, about his road, about his solutions experience, and he's willing to share with the others.
Well, I think that's because the president is very confident. He's a very confident public figure. I mean, just look how he got on with President Trump down in Mar-a-Lago last April. They got on like a house on fire.
I think it's on the one side, Xi Jinping is really, really, you know, very capable leader with vision. But on the other side, the China has been developed after decades of reform, has been, you know, climbed into a certain kind of leverage that it can really have a bigger vision and to see the bigger picture and want to play a bigger role.
This is a very informative party Congress. The political report delivered by Mr. Xi Jinping alone took 3.5 hours. Right. John, from a very Western point of view, what content, what part of the report and the ensuing press conferences were most appealing, perhaps, to Western journalists, to the Western world looking in on China?
Well, I mean, for me, I can never quite get over the fact that the speech was 3 hours and 20 minutes. And I've said on several occasions, and I'll say it one more last time now, that it's inconceivable that a Western politician would go for 3 hours and 20 minutes. It just wouldn't happen. It simply wouldn't happen, and I can't think of an occasion when it has. Nonetheless, that's a cultural thing. I mean, I think, you know, we've got a situation here where, for me, I think the biggest issues to come out of the speech, and I was in the Great Hall of the People for all of it, I listened to all of it, the issue of tackling climate change, that's one big one, and Lindy went to the press conference of the ministry that handles that. Clearly, China is in a very, very strong position now to take a global leadership role when it comes to climate change, because America appears to be backing away from the Paris Accord. There was so much excitement when China and America, the two big polluters, let's face it, came together in that accord, and now America is rowing back from it. So China has a chance to be a real, President Xi has a chance to be a real global leader when it comes to climate change. The other thing, of course, I think is what I call STI, which is science, technology, innovation. And I went to the innovation press conference at the press center, and I thought that was very, very interesting, because I think, you know, China has issues that it has to overcome regarding the economy. Growth is, what, 6.5%, that's the target for this year. In the third quarter, which was just announced, it was 6.8%, so that's good, but they average it out over the year. So we'll see what it turns out to be, but it was 10 years ago, it was like 12%, so it's not as good as it was. Still good, but not as good as it was. So, you know, with the population to support, China needs to get a great GDP once more, and the answer to a good GDP is innovation. China has to innovate its way out of these issues, and I think it's well placed to do so.
And it's something China has taken a lot of pride in, its innovation drive and the speed at which China has been developing its innovation sector. One more for you, Lindy. Going away from this party Congress, what part of it will stay with you that when you report on China from the African continent, it will always be on your mind? It will always provide fresh perspectives for you when you talk about China-related issues. For example, the Belt and Road Initiative and the implementation of that on the African continent.
You know, I must say that having been working in the Nairobi office over these past few years, I've only really looked at the Belt and Road Initiative, or One Belt, One Road, from that perspective. But on our second day here, we went to one of the open discussions held by the provincial delegates, and I sat in on the Liaoning province discussion. And there, for the first time, I heard the Belt and Road Initiative mentioned outside of the context that I'm so used to hearing it in. And it really struck me that, wow, this is not just political rhetoric. This is not just a conversation we're having for the sake of Africans. It is something that here in China, provinces like Liaoning are also seeing how they fit into this master plan, as it were. So I think it's like a hallmark of Xi Jinping's policies, you know what I mean? It's the one that stands out the most, certainly for Africa, and indeed for me. Really now I'm starting to see the bigger picture that he's been talking about all this time, but it did take me coming all this way to finally see the sort of bigger picture of the One Belt
on the topic of the big picture, let's also talk about the new era. Hanbing, a lot of new terms have been thrown around during the party Congress, and in particular the new era is making headlines because it's such a broad word and you can interpret this word in any way you want. Talk to us about what this term entails and what type of achievement or development does China have in mind for this new era?
I think new era to me is like a redefinition not only for China's social contradictions, but also it gives people a clearer view of what is China Dream. China Dreams now has much clearer goals with the targets and timetable. Let's take the migrant worker as an example. Many decades ago, when China first opened its reform and opening up, migrant workers, their demand just for like food and money. And then what we can provide is jobs. and something else. But now, after decades, the migrant workers staying in the city, they want their kids to get equal chances for education. They want their equal chances to get citizenship like those who have been staying in the city. So, but what the country cannot do is that there is a gap between the rich and poor, and the unbalanced development of north and south, east and west. So this is, but to me, I don't think there's a sharp contradiction of what has been said before, like China is still in the preliminary stage, initial stage of socialism. I think what Xi Jinping wants to say is he wants to make a pragmatic approach to deal with the problems inside and outside. That is a new judgment, and by having that new judgment, and then all of the others like the missions, policies, targets will be changed. Xi wants to bring up the country into a new journey for modernization, which is the higher goal is to build China not only a prosperous country, but also a country which is strong, prosperous.
Well, and I think what Lindy and I are impressed about, if I can speak on your behalf for a second, because I know we've spoken about it, is that this isn't really just for the next 5 years. I mean, it goes on really for what is it, till 1949, till another
I think 30 years later,
yes.
Not only for the second term of buying 2020, yes. Where China can firstly reach the prosperous society goal.
So whoever may come after this president will continue the work.
Yep, it's in for the long haul, guys.
Yes.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I've enjoyed our discussions immensely. Thank you so much, John, Hanbing, and Lindy. Thank you.
Thanks.
Also on The World Today at this hour, there are over 85 million people with physical challenges in China, accounting for 6% of the total population. Yang Xiaoling is a delegate at the 19th CPC National Congress, and she has committed 27 years of her life to special education. Our Luo Yu has more on her drive to promote special education for children with disabilities in China.
This is her stage, but she is not the dancer. A dance teacher and now deputy head of the Wuhan #1 School for the Deaf in central China's Hubei province. She has been working in special education for nearly 3 decades. Many students call her mom.
他教我学钢琴，还有带我们去外面吃好吃的。带我们去外面吃好吃的。还有。 教我们学跳舞。教我们学跳舞。
I didn't realize how time flies.
Time just whizzes by, doesn't it, when you're live on TV? Thanks, everybody. Very good.
She spends at least 3 hours in the school's dance studio. Her dream is to see her students shine on the stage.
This way? This way?
So we hope you're able to see that on the screen. Presumably you focus on the screen in the gallery, did you, in the control room? Hopefully you saw.
I actually wanted to ask you, do you think the changes, moving from one great...
There are a lot of changes.
Yeah.
I think another message is China is really much confident that one of the other things being written into the charter is that the CPC is going to lead this country to achieve more goals. I think a lot of questions remains to be seen that what China is going to be and how much impact it has on the world.
Which way are we going?
I think this way. Over the past decades, I've been covering the political events, and also I've been traveling all across China. What I really think this is what we did about the what is China special earlier this year, and the big picture special just ahead of the Party Congress. I really want to tell the true, a kind of true picture about China, and I do think, hey John, I do think it's very interesting and fascinating that you can see China from a different angle, and I am seeing China in another angle. And once all of our angles are shared, maybe China's image will be much true, but what is real true, I think it's really depend how you see it.
Well, I think my feeling about this regarding Belt and Road, for example, there's a lot of interest in Belt and Road because it's an absolutely audacious plan. It's huge, it's enormous, and nobody is doing anything that remotely resembles it. Nobody in the world, only China. And China can do that because it has a lot of money to do that. It has the ambition and it has the drive under this General Secretary stroke President Xi. But, in America, where I come from, there is great interest in Belt and Road because there's a possibility for American corporations to make a lot of money. But there's also a very real concern because people are still a little wary of China. A little bit wary of China. It's funny because the greatest influx of immigrants that we've had into the United States in the last handful of years has been from Asia. So Asian people are make up the greatest proportion of US immigration. But Americans are not afraid of Asians or China or Chinese people, but they are just a little bit wary. And what I mean by that is that businesses are not sure, just not quite sure whether they're ready to do business with Chinese banks yet, because Americans are told that there's a lack of transparency, there are issues, and that's a hurdle that this country is going to have to overcome if it is to bring in the great corporations of the US.
That is exactly why we need to continue to focus on China and from different perspectives.
And that's why events like this are useful, because as I think I said earlier, it's a sense of dotting the I's and crossing the T's in many cases. People get clarity where they didn't have clarity before.
And it is also very important that we have different perspectives, not only from the countries like the United States, but also from countries like someone coming from Africa, from European countries. I think that's
it's interesting because this question of trust. I mean, I do think that in some areas you might find that people want to understand better what China's agenda is with Africa. So there were some key things that Xi Jinping said in his opening address in his report about how China's not looking to impart any kind of hegemony on anyone else or expand its territory anywhere. But on the other hand, there's definitely more trust in Africa than I think there is in America from the way you describe it. And it's because the relationships that African countries have with Western powers have always come with conditions. If you do this, we'll give you this. If you do this, we'll help you with that. Whereas the China, it comes flat out with no interference. We're partners, we can work together. If we have a common goal, we can achieve it side by side. Yeah.
For decades, China hasn't got any war.
Yeah.
And China is, China didn't, grant their policies to others. There's no colonialization. Look at the good whenever Chinese products there, like the oil prices could be rise. It's not that, it's not that whenever Chinese goods are in the other countries that their products, goods will be, prices will be high. It's actually on the other side. So I'm expecting China more. Has realized that and investment in really wants what Xi Jinping says, a destiny of common prosperity.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think there'll be more investment in Africa because China learns so much by investing there. It learns how to run companies, it learns how to invest in countries and then make intelligent investments.
John, I think it's so fascinating talking with both of you, but
do we have to go? Can't we carry on for another 4 hours?
Time can't steal for anyone, and I think you have live crosses tonight. I have another live cross for China 24 tonight. I need to prepare for that. But
it's a pleasure to meet you.
Me too. I really hope that you come to our headquarters quite often, and I have chances to go to Nairobi and to DC.
Come to DC, we'll show you the sights.
Please have a gathering before you leave. We have a lot to share. And I think it's time that we need to say goodbye to our viewers.
So from Harbin and from Lindy M. Tongana
and you, John.
And me, John Terrett. Thanks for watching wherever you are in the world.
Thanks.
Bye for now.
Bye.